So Sean Manion is a neuroscientist. He is a former DoD civilian, and he is now an entrepreneur, and he'll tell you all about that and a lot more in telling the story of blockchain. So Sean, the floor is yours.
All right, hello, can everyone hear me? And it is after lunch, so if you need a nap, take a nap, it'll be all right. Now, my name is Sean Manion. I am here to talk about blockchain. I've phrased it in the form of information tracking because that's how I'm currently viewing it, but blockchain's one of those big elephants where different people can describe it and see it and view it in different ways. Show of hands, who has a roughly functional understanding of what blockchain is? Much better than my usual crowd. I do have to admit I am a neuroscientist. I am a bench researcher and research administrator by training, and I am coming at this from a very different angle. My audiences are usually executives in government and a lot of health administrators and healthcare providers and researchers. So there's probably a lot of people here who are far more expert in some of the underlying cryptography and some of the IT aspects from me, but that's not what I'm really looking to talk about today. I put this up not as a resume so much as to help you understand where I'm coming from, because the blockchain world is one where people are looking at this new tech or tech process from a lot of different angles. They are seeing it and getting very excited. They are seeing it and rejecting it, oftentimes because they're not looking at it from multiple angles. What I hope to do today is not to push it on you, not to tell you you have to use it, but to get you thinking about it in different ways, thinking about it from my healthcare application and science application that I'm looking towards, and start to get a dialogue going between those people with your skill sets and those people with domain subjects or domain subject expertise in other areas that probably need to be talking with people like yourselves in far more IT-related areas, so that we can get a good dialogue and get people in the U.S., private and public, figuring out where this works, where it doesn't work, and where we can put it to work for us. Because right now, it's moving quicker in many parts of the globe than it is here, and my fear is that we're going to fall behind. I come from academia. I'm a neuroscientist, a bench scientist. It's the world I know the best. Spent a lot of time in that doing that work, but wasn't that excited by the narrow view through the microscope. So I jumped over to government research administration. I had been working at Uniformed Services University before that, so I was very interested in the military health mission. As a civilian myself, I was able to be Deputy Chief of Staff at the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center. That was a very valuable experience for me because I moved from being a scientist to learning how to just find a whole bunch of people who knew things that I didn't and bring them together to get the job done. I then moved on and oversaw a research network that consisted of 17 different sites, hundreds of different researchers and partners, 60 different protocols, and I learned in a very real way the pain points with data flow, administrative and research data flow, in a large research network. And it was part of my job to fix those things on an ad hoc basis and often talk with my colleagues about how to fix it at a much more scaled level. But there was always the need for more tools for that type of work. I am the vice president of American College of Military Public Health, which is a small nonprofit focused on traumatic brain injury and psychological health research. It is a vehicle or a forum for cross-agency, VA, DoD, NIH, academia, industry people to work together on projects that are a little more low-level and using public data rather than some of the specialized things they do in their own industry, but sometimes there are barriers to working across lanes in interagency research. So we set that up as a way to do that, and it keeps me connected with the mission that I found very important. But I did leave the federal government about a year ago. I'm actually just shy of my cooling off period, so I'm not here to sell anything whatsoever, especially to the federal employees. I am setting up a small company called Science Distributed, and we're looking to see where blockchain and distributed ledger technology can be applied in a useful way to academic and government research. So what is a blockchain? It's essentially a distributed ledger. This distributed ledger technology is not the first attempt to do this, but it has become one of the more successful attempts. There are also other types of distributed ledger technologies that are out there, Hashgraph, Mimblewimble. These are things that are developing very quickly. I'm going to use blockchain in a way that irritates some of my colleagues because I use it very generally just so I don't have to always say blockchain and other distributed ledger technologies. So just please know that today. It essentially allows for a network of people to share a distributed database. This database allows for the collection of information and the tracking of any usage of that information depending upon the protocol that has been set up. In essence, you are able to track the information that you've programmed the system to track and have an ineffable tamper-proof longitudinal record of that. That is very valuable in some instances. It is completely unnecessary in other instances. It is safe. There's an encryption aspect to it that allows for authenticity of who put what information in. There's also a distributed nature and the protocol and algorithms that underlie it that allow for a high level of difficulty in any large-sized network of tampering with any past data so that you can't change it. It's safe. It's safe and secure in some respects in a physical sense because you have a distributed ledger. That ledger, if it's disrupted in some of those instances, is going to exist in other places as well. So some of the security that it can bring is from that physical distribution. It's inexpensive in some respects, and we'll get into where it does get a little more expensive. It works across existing systems. I have been asked, I talked to the folks at Defense Health Agency last fall at their industry day, and they wanted to know, is this software, is this architecture, is this hardware, what is this? And I don't think there's a single definition of where it falls, especially from a government acquisition perspective, but it is, from what I've been told by folks in different agencies, being viewed mostly as software these days. So it's something that can be used on existing systems. It's not meant to replace legacy systems. It's meant to be used inclusive of those, or included in those legacy systems. There's a lot of value, especially from my perspective in the research industry, where a lot of money gets spent on managing and analyzing data and being able to automate the data on a blockchain through what's called smart contracts. Lawyers get aggravated with that term. It's not actually a contract of any type so much as just an automated program to give you analysis of the data. And there's an efficiency to it. It's a peer-to-peer network. It does not have, it bypasses the need for a lot of third parties or a lot of system checks that don't, it bypasses a lot of need for third parties. I'm not saying that in a very eloquent way, but this efficiency allows for much better information sharing amongst the participants in the network. Okay, who here has heard of Bitcoin, just comparatively to the other one? A lot more hands usually go up. And I hope for a day when I don't have to put this slide up, but there are two major concerns when talking about blockchain to any audience. The first is that it's connected with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is a single type of financial application of blockchain technology, and it was the first to mature, and so it is the most prominent. It is also something that is a cryptocurrency that has its origins in use by a lot of different individuals who are interested in it from the mathematical crypto standpoint, from the IT standpoint, from the being able to exchange something that is perceived to have value without banks, but also with illicit uses. The drug trade, terrorism, money laundering was one of the early uses of Bitcoin. And so I bring this up and say it's not Bitcoin because this is not the technology itself that I'm trying to talk about today. It's a very exciting area, and there are now a couple thousand cryptocurrencies out there, and I know people who do day trading and have made lots of money that I'm not sure how is money all the time, but there's a lot of discussion and debate about that. I'm not someone who's involved in cryptocurrency. I haven't invested in it. It is interesting for me from an academic standpoint, but it is not where I want to go with this today. I know oftentimes that is an area of interest, but I'm going to try and stay a little bit away from there. Actually, that's good enough. So blockchain, here's the other problem with blockchain is it's really, really hyped. And as one person I know has put it, blockchain isn't hot sauce. You just can't put that stuff on everything. And there's this probably will get me in trouble if the red hot people find out I'm using it. So I say hot sauce in general, but there is a problem with people on the other end not being afraid of its connections with some sort of illicit currency, but also being overly excited about where it can apply. Blockchain is not a solution for everything. In some instances, it can be a solution. In some instances, it could be a solution, but might be overkill, and there might be more simplistic solutions that haven't been thought of. Although, in that instance, it can be a forcing function to figure out how you can get better use of your data with other technologies, or existing applications. It is not going to solve human problems. You may hear things with cryptocurrency, this got hacked or that got hacked. It's not the blockchain itself that's getting hacked. It's the interface that's getting hacked. It's people doing dumb stuff that people do. And it's also not going to standardize your data. When we get into the later part of this, healthcare and research data is a very non-standardized area. It is a lot easier to take something like a financial transaction that has a unit or a partial unit, and it goes from one person to another or to a series of parties, and program that into the governance of how a protocol will work. When you start to look at something like traumatic brain injury, where you have hundreds of different ICD-9 codes that can be input by dozens of different specialists at much different time points in the course of a single patient's problems, it's no longer something that is standardized in any way that is easy to put into a protocol. But we'll get more into that a little bit later. One of the reasons why I'm saying that blockchain is something that everyone should be thinking about is because it's getting utilized or looked at and utilized in a lot of different places. This came from the financial realm. People in the financial realm are most familiar with it, and beyond the cryptocurrency, they have started looking at what the technology itself can do for some of their different processes. Sometimes this is wait and see. One of the ones I find interesting on here is USAA was one of the early adopters. There's probably a lot of people with USAA in this room. They joined the Chamber of Digital Commerce back in early 2015, so they could be part of the standards discussion and figure out how it could be applied in finance and in insurance. They also set up an early dashboard for Bitcoin holders to use when they open their account, so they could track their investment through Bitcoin. So they're friendly with that. But there's very few banks that aren't looking at this, at least behind the scenes, and how it can apply. The audit function it brings to them and the speed with which that can happen, I'm told, is very, very enticing. One of the biggest fraud areas in banking is people exploiting the time it takes to get verification on a transaction taking place. With the speed that this allows, you can shrink that transaction time from days down to seconds, and that just shrinks the window for fraud. So that, amongst other things, has gotten the banks very interested. This is one of those things that doesn't fit well on a screen, but you can find all sorts of attempts to set up an image for where the technology is being applied. There's not an industry that isn't looking at this, as far as I know. I mean, there's at this point applications being looked at, piloted, in some cases successfully, in some cases they still haven't found the right way to use it. But any industry you look at is starting to see this technology or this technology process utilized. If you are in an industry that is looking at it, which most are, there's probably a consortium looking at how the standards for that industry are being set up in major manufacturers, in supply chain, in different types of retail, and starting to more and more in healthcare. The larger groups and smaller groups who are interested are getting together to figure out what the standards are going to look like. The overall standards are being looked at by NIST, and I know when I talk to DoD folks, they're looking at NIST to give them the direction on the overall standards. But because of the boutique application in each industry, that doesn't standardize the data. So each industry is going to have its own questions of how this gets utilized. You can go it alone, or you can go with a consortium, and it seems like the most successful groups are going with the consortium. So this is about as technical as I'm going to get today. As I said, I don't come from a technical background. I'm someone who's trying to envision where this car can drive and where we can go with it and who we can see with it and what roads might need to be built or gas stations need to be built alongside those roads. I have people I work with who are the engineers, who are the mechanics, who can tell me how it works under the hood. So I'm not going to go deep into this, but I do want to talk a little bit about it to orient those who don't have a background on it. So in the basic model of how a blockchain works, someone wants a transaction. In this case, it's a financial transaction that's imaged. That request goes out peer-to-peer to the network, and it goes out based on an automatic protocol that's already written into the software that's been downloaded. I don't know if I can do a good laser pointer, but this statement under validation validates the transactions and the user's status using known algorithms is probably the biggest hand wave that I'm going to do today, and that happens a lot. Those algorithms can be relatively simple, or in case of much more complex data, can be very complex, and the underlying validation or proof that occurs is something of much discussion and a whole other worlds of debate, and we'll get a little bit into a couple of those proofs. But for the most part, the way that validation occurs is in a public blockchain, something that's often called proof of work or mining, where computers that are involved and have agreed to be part of the network are doing problem solving in order to be rewarded with coins, are rewarded with an incentive, and at the same time provide the computing power for that validation. If you use a closed system, if you use a private blockchain, that becomes unnecessary. And as long as you have the computing power within your internal system, this can be set up without that type of excessive use of energy, as some people will put it. Once that's verified, and this can be cryptocurrency, but you can think of those transactions as not being related to just money or to just something of a coin value. I view it from the lens of information or data tracking for research, because an audit in that instance would be something that would be very, very helpful. But think of it as applied to your industry, not necessarily just with cryptocurrency. But as that cryptocurrency transaction or other transaction is verified, it then is added to a chain of blocked information. These are usually of a specific size based on the protocol, and they are tied to each other in a way that if you attempt to tamper with any of the earlier ones, it will show up in the later ones. And so you would need to tamper with more than 50% of the system in order to successfully change any of the old information, which is where you get the tamper-proof longitudinal record of the transactions. And then the transaction's complete. And at its simplest form, this is a longitudinal record of all the transactions that happen within the system, which allows for keeping track of a balance that everybody has if it's a cryptocurrency that the system is based on, or keeping track of something, and I touched upon a few of those, keeping track of something like drugs in a drug supply chain. There are some groups that are looking to be able to track a drug anywhere from its point of origin to each dosage that's taken by a patient. That's a very advanced look at what this could do. It's going to take a while, and it's going to take control of a system or incentives to a system to get them to be successful. But it's pretty remarkable when you think about it from either a fraud perspective or a counterfeit drug perspective that can lead to deaths, is being able to find the provenance of every drug dose that every patient takes can be an incredible lifesaver and cost saver. With that supply chain, I spoke earlier about speed. One of the more interesting applications I've seen for this being used in a supply chain is Walmart used it for tracking mangoes in this case, but in general theory, they want to be able to track produce that might be recalled. It normally took them 4 to 5 days to find out where any 2 mangoes in a store came from in their very vast network and be able to say with assuredness it came from this source or it came from that source. By putting every point along that supply chain into a blockchain that everybody from the store manager back to people at the head office, back to the people at the at any point along the supply chain could access that information, they were able to reduce that from 4.5 days down to 2 seconds. And that time save is very, very much one of the driving factors for supply chain being interested in it. Letting everybody along the system know where everything is at what time and not have to rely on going to a centralized or third party to get that information. So some of the advantages are here. It allows you to have essentially a tamper-proof ledger, which in the financial world is very, very big. It can provide a level of trust with the identity verification of the users. It allows for transparency in what happened. Auditors seem to love it because once they realize that it gives them everything they need to go back and do a very rapid audit, it becomes worthwhile to have something like this implemented. It allows for some scaled information sharing, and I'll get into that, how that will work for research in a little bit. And then the smart contract execution, or automating some of the information that you've then input onto the system, is something that allows for a lot of cost efficiency in figuring out what you can do with your data in a way that doesn't require huge levels of new data managers, and can allow all your folks to be doing more things in addition to that. The last one is a little bit more, I left that in there, it's from a different talk, and it's a little more pie in the sky. Some of the utility of these things is being looked at from a very long range. There's a lot of people in healthcare who want the patient to be in control of their data and view this as a tool to allow that to occur. There's a lot of hurdles between here and there, including standards in the system, regulatory challenges, and really do all the patients want to handle their own data? Are they capable of handling their own data? Is that a burden they want to take on? I'm sure some people do and some people don't. So I left that in there, though, because right now you are going to see and hear some very high-level aspirational applications of this. For me, some of the less sexy applications are far more low-hanging fruit and interesting. The General Services Administration last year ran a pilot. Jose Arrieta was the genius who kind of put it together for, I think, under $125,000 and found a vendor to set up a blockchain for vendor proposal review. And he layered that across 22 existing legacy systems and was able to achieve a 110-day down to 10-day reduction in review time of those vendor proposals. He also reduced the cost by 90%, which I think may have upset some of the people whose budget that was going to cut into, but that's another matter. But with that type of reduction in processing time and administrative review time, the vendors loved it, the people internal loved it because they didn't have to spend their time signing into 22 different legacy systems. Jose Arrieta has just taken in January the top acquisition position in Health and Human Services. He and I have been able to talk a number of times, and I've been introducing him to all the people he needs to know within the health community and the research community, because of the impact on that for research, for grant review, could be immense. Some of our best and brightest are doing research and spending more time than they need to, either filling out paperwork again and again and again to try and get grant monies, or then waiting for that money to come in. It's sometimes 15 months from start to finish for some of the big ROI grants from NIH. That's entirely too long, and if we could reduce that even by 50% with some of the application that has already been successful in GSA, that'll be a huge savings to the NIH budget and more money back into research. I'm going to talk about challenges first before I take a breather and see if we have any initial questions. There are challenges to this, and don't let anyone tell you that they're not. I am a big advocate of looking at this technology, but I'm a big advocate of looking at it with all the realistic seriousness that application of anything new takes. Integrating this into existing systems, doing it at a enterprise level rather than a pocketed level, like the pilot at GSA was just one area, will prevent a siloing of different blockchains. That's happening in some industries, and I'm sure it's happening even in some companies working with it. There are intermediary chains that can resolve some of that challenge, but it's still going to be better if this is looked at from a slower, more enterprise level, industry by industry, rather than in tiny little pockets. Governance is a big challenge the more complex the data is. We'll get into a little bit more of that with healthcare, but if you don't have standardized data and if you don't have a system for how data gets processed, that system either has to be created by those people who are developing the technology, who may or may not know the specific domain area, or you need to get consensus from people in that domain area in order to get it to be utilized, as the DoD is having some challenges finding out with Cerner out in the Northwest. If you don't consider the doctor and patient workflow and what you give them in a new system, it's not going to go well. That needs to be taken into account in every industry. If you do not have a standardized way that data is captured, you're going to have to set that up with consensus of those subject matter experts and users at the other end for it to be successful. And lack of maturity of blockchain. I mean, it's been utilized in its current form for 10 years in really one application, and that's great. But outside of finance, it has not been used heavily. So figuring out what it can do, piloting it, testing it, seeing if it can break. Those are the things that are going to need to happen. There's also a lot of competing platforms, and more every day. Oracle has just announced it's coming out with a platform. Microsoft has one. IBM has one. Linux's Hyperledger project has one. The big ones, blockchain, Ethereum, they're existent. There's one that the banking industry has put together called R3, and there are new ones all the time. I talked to some people yesterday from another federal agency, and they are of the opinion that we're about to hit an inflection point with that enough people have been dancing around some of the different platforms and are going to make a choice on which one they want to start utilizing, and we're going to see that consolidate. Brian Bellendorf, who heads up the Linux Hyperledger project, he's someone who I think he was the original coder of Apache back in the 90s. He watched the internet develop and helped with the World Wide Web and its development. He views an inflection point coming and a consolidation as well. I saw in an interview that he gave last week with NASDAQ. So I think people have had enough studying of it, and they're going to start to pick some of these platforms. So we might see a consolidation soon. With that, I'm going to take a brief pause from the presentation to see if there are questions now before I go into a specific subject matter area.
And just a reminder, raise your hand, please, so we know where to get you. Got one up here. To your left, Sean.
What would you recommend the industry do from maybe a lower level, people that work with end users or contracting offices to kind of spread or evangelize blockchain, or how can we position it with kind of current procurements? And if it's too early at this stage, what do you suggest in the next 1 to 3 years?
I would say one, study. There are there's expensive classes that you can get big companies to come in and do for $1,000 a head, or there's free Coursera courses that you can go and understand it a little bit better. Or if that's not your area of expertise, find someone who does understand it better, so that you can have conversations about new things that you see. Two, talk about it, having conversations with others to see where people are with it, to better understand it, to bounce ideas off of each other is going to be important. Be even-handed with it. I definitely see pushback, like I said, with the hype or with the fear. I see that being an impediment to application or an impediment to even piloting. I think after that, making a strong business case for piloting is good. Definitely within government, it looks weird from an acquisition standpoint, and so the cybersecurity concerns, the acquisition concerns, beyond any domain expertise concerns, are going to be something that you have to take into account. So coming up with that business case analysis, how much is this going to cost to implement? Is it going to be easy to implement because the data is already standardized, or is this going to take a series of consensus meetings to even run this pilot and get it set up? That type of, looking at the numbers of if it's going to be valuable, is going to be very strong in the argument for being able to work with it. But finding other advocates, there's a public-private blockchain and emerging technologies listserv that the government has run out of GSA, and they also have a private one for government employees. They have monthly meetings. There's a lot of input from a lot of different places. There's more and more pockets that I'm finding. Just going out and attending events have allowed me to find people. NIST has come out with a report and asked for public input. USAID has come out with a report, so they're obviously advanced in their thinking about it. DoD was tasked by Congress in NDAA 2018 to write a report on how it's being utilized, how it could be utilized by our allies and our enemies, how it could be utilized across all major critical infrastructure. I believe that report is due next month. I don't know if it's going to be released publicly or not, But looking for those types of things to see where different agencies are moving on it is probably also useful.
I believe we got 2 questions in the very back.
Hi, my name's Chris Daly with Active Cyber. When you think of cybersecurity and blockchain, one thing that comes to my mind is, is there something you could do from a blockchain perspective to show proof of security? In other words, what controls were in place when this particular event occurred or when this particular transaction occurred. I'm aware of one blockchain platform called Rivets that provides some level of capability in that. Are you aware of anything else in the cybersecurity realm where blockchain is being leveraged?
That's a very good question, and I don't know that industry well enough to give you another name, but I would not be surprised if there's more than the Rivets that you've mentioned. In some of the healthcare applications, the automated nature of it lends itself well to scraping existing data, whether it's temperature in a room or whether a door was locked. And then if you go back to the timestamp of when an incident happened, it seems like that would be a pretty straightforward application. I can look into it. If you want to, get in touch with me afterwards. If I find anything from the people I talk to, I can pass that along. But that industry is one. I'm trying to track about 200 different startups and their applications in the health realm, and I mean, there's thousands out there, and I'm sure cybersecurity is much more advanced than that, but I don't know the names.
I've seen a couple cases where people have gotten in trouble for using computing resources at their businesses, and I don't know if that was specific to Bitcoin itself, or I guess the question is, how intensive is data mining or the mining process, and how many resources does that take, and is that just dependent on the industry or the amount of data, those type of things? Where do those resources come from?
I would imagine they got in trouble for mining for cryptocurrency in those instances. That's definitely something that people slip up and do, and that's going to be a cybersecurity concern, because if they're not supposed to be doing it to begin with, them putting that program onto the computer is not a good idea. And if it's Bitcoin, people have looked at that program and understand it, but there's a lot of new ones that nobody's really screening for what else is written into that code. So yeah, big no-no, definitely in the government space. But with regard to finding computing power that allows you to do that, it's definitely an area that people are searching for. In Venezuela, where the hyperinflation skyrocketed the currency, and yet energy was dirt cheap, if not free, there were a lot of people who were able to get their monthly supplies on the black market by mining cryptocurrency rather than trying to fight with the hyperinflation. They, of course, would get arrested for that or get their rigs confiscated, and then the police would usually set them up and do their own mining with it. So if you've got free power, the mining that you can do with cryptocurrency is going to be valuable to you. The trade-off between energy and the mining is definitely an area of a lot of debate. But at the same time, other people are looking to move past that particular proof of work that requires mining and move to other proofs for an open public system. Again, if you have a private blockchain and a closed permission blockchain, you are going to be able to set your own computing power to what you need to resolve the verification aspect. You won't need to rely on that mining or have your users rely on that mining. So that's probably another thing to make distinct. Okay, one more, and then I'm going to jump into my bold prediction up here.
Yeah, I was thinking about the majority problem. The size of the network and how that affects the accuracy or the reliability of the audit trail and the blockchain and all that. Is there a good understanding of that and how to architect a good blockchain application in terms of the size of the nodes and like if you're going to do something private, for example, how big of a network do you need to get a good assurance that nobody can tamper with or interfere, or and some insider could try to interfere with or tamper with the blockchain or the network?
And that's going to be different for different use cases. I know I called it the 51% problem because in most instances you're going to have a majority vote in the consensus protocol. You can set a consensus protocol up however you would like to if you're setting up your own private system. If you want to make that 75%, I'm not sure of the value of that. I haven't broken that down, but I'm sure there's an area of exploration for that. I'll get to the end here, and there's a couple of journals that a lot of the things that are being published on blockchain right now, and that type of exploration or exercise would probably be in. But I'm not familiar with why you would want to do that, or what number of nodes in the network make you want to do that. Especially in a private network, you're going to have some control over who's going in there. Of course, you do have to be concerned with some type of insider threat, but for the most part, I think people are usually using a 51% consensus majority. Okay, I do appreciate the questions, and I'm gonna allow for some more time at the end as I move through this. But I want to get into some of the reasons why I started to be focused on this. Back in 2016, full disclosure, I discovered blockchain in a bar. I was at a place in Baltimore, and I was friends with the owner, and me and a couple of my other research colleagues were in there. And as I said, we were always looking for new ways to solve problems, new ways to do things at scale to make research better. One of the problems with researchers is they don't like sharing their data. It's a trust problem. They don't want to get scooped. They think people are going to screw up their data. They don't know what they did with it. So we're talking about this, and my friend who owned the bar and has some background in Johns Hopkins grant management said, "Oh, you guys need a blockchain." I don't know what that word is. It was like Jim Mora with blockchain. Who's talking about blockchain? But it was a moment where I ran home and I looked it up in Google. I mean, he explained it to me a little bit, but I said, okay, who's using this for healthcare and research? And it just so happens in the summer of 2016, a woman named Debbie Bucci, who works at Health and Human Services Office of the National Coordinator, held a white paper contest for blockchain applications to healthcare and research. And so the timing was brilliant, and I went and I read those 15 winners, and they covered everything from how it could reduce insurance and Medicaid fraud to be used, MIT group looking directly at health research. And it opened my eyes. All the pain points that I had been overseeing a research administration, I saw not immediate problem solving for, but the potential to solve problems differently with the application of this technology. I was very excited by it, did reading for several months, took a Coursera course, talked to people who understand things better than I do so they could explain it to me, because I know brains, but I don't know computers. And I made this bold statement in January of 2017 because it seemed to me this is so good to almost be an inevitability that people were going to start using this for research, because I'll get into there's a reproducibility problem in research. If you can't reproduce research, especially in the health sciences, it's adding noise to the system, and you're not moving towards your goal of better cures or better treatments for disease or for health problems. And that reproducibility problem could be completely changed by the ability to audit people's research data. And there is oftentimes in federal government, and I was part of the DoD at the time, the interest in getting more research out of the data that they had, getting that data to be analyzed and results to be something cleaner and more reproducible. And yet it's a persistent problem within the system that gets talked about sometimes and not others. So for me, I had a aha moment, and I ran to my bosses, and I made probably the worst pitch ever for bringing blockchain technology to Defense Health Agency, which is already had been burdened with some new stuff with their new electronic health record, and I got told, no way, not today, come back in 10 years. I don't know if that was literal, but it was close. So I left the federal government and moved on to private industry. I decided I wasn't sure if it was going to be nonprofit or for-profit, but I decided I needed to explore this with a little more rapidity and flexibility. My mother died of cancer last year, and that's the type of thing that we will all deal with in our lives. But it was a new level of heartbreaking to not to not be able to see advancement fast enough and to know why that advancement in health takes as long as it does. There is what's called a 17-year bench to bedside cycle, where it takes off in 17 years from a new idea to move into clinical practice. I can tell you firsthand, probably 2 to 5 years of that is paperwork. It's not something that is ideal, and it can be improved. There's a lot of good people at administrative and health and research levels who are trying to solve problems, but I saw something that I felt could solve the problem in different ways. And the more I explored it, the more I saw administrative fixes. And so for me, that breaks down into a value proposition for making science more distributed, using the distributed ledger term rather than blockchain specific, and that is better science, cheaper research, and faster miracles. Those things I view as achievable, and I'm not the only one. As more people look at this, they're seeing that there's value in bringing this technology specifically to research and research data, to research administrative processes, to automating through smart contracts some of the data management. And I found this value to be something, to be a worthwhile goal. I have been talking with a lot of different individuals, and it's starting to become more understood that using this technology, piloting this technology, experimenting with this technology in the health sciences is something that's going to be of value, but also be very hard to do because of that non-standardization. And I set this up like this. Probably the other thing of value from this slide is science is complicated with a lot of different stakeholders. Scientists want better data because they put their career on building off of other people's findings. And if those findings turn out to be wrong, it can be like, a rock in a foundation crumbling something out. So they want better science for that reason. Funders, I was a research administrator for the DoD. They want more bang for your buck out of research. They want a better ROI, and there's a slipping ROI for research. And of course, we all want faster miracles. We all want something that is going to move cures and treatments for ourselves and loved ones and all of humanity to move forward faster. So that's more of a universal goal. We spend a lot of money on research. I won't spend too much time with this, but one number that's worth noting is the NIH. I believe this is their extramural funding level, $29.6 billion. That's almost $30 billion a year in a lot of different areas and a lot of different research. But remember that number, because if you look at U.S. biomedical research, just in the basic research, almost the same level of funding that goes to NIH extramural funding goes to funding that, or goes to research that can't be replicated. As I said before, there's a reproducibility problem, and that reproducibility problem is one of the pain points, soft spots, target areas that blockchain or distributed ledger technology may help to reduce or to minimize. So it's a dollar thing, at its core. And then anytime you reduce costs or you reduce loss within research, you're going to have more money to do more research. And having overseen a clinical research network and overseen a lot of small projects within that network at military treatment facilities and VAs, I can tell you it's probably almost equivalent to that in the clinical research realm. Which means there's a lot of things we could be doing better. And I don't bring this up to, I'm a scientist. A lot of my friends are scientists and researchers. This is not done with any sort of malicious waste. This is done because the incentive system, the drive to publish, how quickly things are done, the noise within the system is just higher than it could be. And so it's an area for improvement. It's a room for improvement, not an accusation of poor performance. Science, and this is not a research a health sciences research area audience, but science has a lot of areas that are ripe for improvement. This is from an open science group, and open science in general is looking to find ways to get better science and cheaper research and faster miracles in their own right. And I think that not recreating the wheel, I've been talking to them and trying to partner with them and look at their applications and see where blockchain may be an extra tool in their toolkit. But you can see in the process of science that there's a lot of different areas that could be improved. The trick is getting the researchers to think about how the incentive systems or the application of this technology could improve science, and they need to be thinking about it. And then getting those folks with specialties in the IT or computer science areas to be able to work with them and understand what the data flow and what the data in science looks like. These are not problems that get solved from one set of background or one set of expertise. So I do hope that there's more cross dialogue. This I repeated because numbers are important, I suppose. I'm not sure what I was there. I'm going to briefly go through before concluding. The ecosystem for blockchain is very, very new. The technology is only 10 years old. Financial applications were the main. Healthcare is less than 2% or 2% of a lot of the investment in it right now. So healthcare and blockchain is so nascent as to go under the radar with many things. This is just another example of that, and with more recent data and in investments in initial coin offerings, which I'm not even going to go into right now. But healthcare is very, very small. The applications in healthcare are several. But for me, I'm looking at improving research, and that clinical trials at the bottom is just one subset. I've seen probably 3 or 4 meetings that had more than one talk on clinical trials in the past 2 years. So again, to stress that this area is so new, this application of the technology is new in itself. The application of the technology to research and science is not something that's robustly being looked at. I'm encouraging it. If anyone here who does work in in places that overlap with or support healthcare research, this is the type of dialogue I would like to bring forward. But the applications in science, and here I've got a few of the journals that you can look up more information on. The application in health science is so nascent that I probably, I know somebody in 80% of those groups right now, because it's really, at a personal level that only a handful of people are working on this. The room for growth is huge. The room for improvement is huge. The amount of work necessary is also huge, though. And that's an article I wrote that was picked up by a small publication that is starting to look at some of the challenges and how they can be improved within traumatic brain injury specifically. Once again, the value proposition. Traumatic brain injury, let's just say it's a big problem. It was a big problem in the military, especially because there was a lot of mild traumatic brain injury that went unreported, undetected, and then caused persistent problems that caused reduction in readiness levels, reduction in quality of life, persistent problems for years for a lot of service members and veterans. But it's got societal-wide problems. That's my area of interest. So that's why I focused on traumatic brain injury as the very specific use case, but also the federal agencies that are interested in traumatic brain injury, and that's NIH, DOD, and VA, have already done a lot of the hard work to standardize the data. And this is something that I think is one of the quietly critical types of work being done to get more research, better research out of federal dollars. Colonel Dallas Hack at MRMC at the time, who's now retired and at OneMind, and Dr. Ramona Hicks at NIH at the time, who's now retired and working at OneMind, which is why I put OneMind up there. This was their brainchild. It took a lot of time to get it together, but what it did was set up standards, common data elements for TBI data that were going into a centralized database to allow for meta-analysis, to allow for cross-study comparison, and to allow for more looks at research funded with federal dollars. I want to stress it was a great idea and still is a great idea, and the problem is the application of it was a little bit challenging. There's over 1,000 active TBI research studies funded by the 3 agencies I mentioned in the federal government. This is at $500 million a year. Of those 1,000, only 15 studies have at this point made their data available in the FITBR system. And a lot of that problem goes back to the challenges I mentioned before. Scientists don't like to be scooped. Scientists don't know what people are going to do with their data. They make their careers on this. But if you had an auditable record of what the contribution of the intellectual property that they contributed to it, you may be able to successfully convince them to put this data out there sooner, to have more people who can solve problems with it looking at it, to get better return on investment by those for those federal research dollars. There are other challenges with how FITBR is succeeding, thriving, or not thriving at this point. It's a little bit slow and costly to execute at NIH right now, and that's because it has to verify identity of requesters, and it has to verify regulatory approval. These things can all be improved with the application of blockchain technology. So I think that as we have a new acquisition lead at Health and Human Services who's a big fan of what this can do administratively, I think those are a couple of areas he's going to be looking at. But it took almost 5 years to set up those common data elements, and so I think when I stress that it's very new within the healthcare industry to utilize this technology of blockchain or distributed ledger, that standardization is going to happen before it's going to be able to be applied to research data. And so I don't know if that work is being conducted, but that's definitely one of the barriers. And these are some of the things that I've mentioned, which are ways that it can help tackle some of those problems. Scientists are a big part of the problem. I will readily admit to that. I'm not afraid to call my own area out. And not just the scientists, but the administrators. Everyone has their own concerns, and everyone has reasons why they don't want to do A, B, or C. And that's one of the challenges, not just for blockchain, but for doing other innovative things in technology in the federal space and with science and research. The next steps I would recommend address those. Administrators dealing with the health regulators is something that is key. Europe's about 2 years ahead of us. For better or for worse, GDPR is going to set them back a little bit, so maybe we can catch up. But no, seriously, I know people who are doing medical device blockchain pilots with the National Health Service in Scotland after 2 years of working with the regulators, because they couldn't even engage the regulators here. No one wanted to talk to them about new technologies. They just said, bah, we don't need that. The health regulatory of conversation is one that has to happen before this will move forward. With the researchers, you need to get them engaged. If you don't have the early adopters to use this, they're gonna stay in their labs and they're not going to use it. And for the developers, I think there's a lot of need for them to realize this is a more complex data system than what you get in financial. So you can't just program how it's going to deal with the data flow and expect the scientists and researchers to accept it. You need to work with them in a user design type of way or human design thinking type of way. And we've started some of this with my group, and it seems to be pretty successful. And the other challenge with healthcare and with research, I'm just getting my head around, and I've started to write a few things about it, but it's not articulated well enough to really describe beyond saying that there are different types of data and different levels of assuredness of data or value of data in contributing to clinical practice guideline development, in contributing to actionable intelligence. And I think if there's anything for a C4i conference that is useful, that thinking of this as tracking data of different levels of actionable intelligence is probably one thing that can be applied to other areas and other industries besides healthcare. With that, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm not sure we have time for any more questions, but if you want to get in contact with me, I put out a brief sit rep every week that I send around to several hundred, mostly government folks who just get to track what's going on. Probably not a lot of health sciences researchers here, but if there are any, we are open to adding more people to our pilot. And with that, thank you.